Hello and welcome to yet another edition of the Daily Report. It's Wednesday, November 24th here in Korea. Antiviral medication to treat COVID-19 is looking to become a key tool in fighting the pandemic, as not all people across the world have access to vaccines. We have more later on. Here first are the pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. So there's been a dramatic rebound in cases here on the local front.
Right, Sunny. It's the highest ever single-day figure that Korea is posting ever since the pandemic. Over 4,000 infections were reported as of 12 a.m. It's the first time that Korea is marking more than 4,116 cases to be exact. And that is more than 4,000 domestic transmissions alone. Also, the number of imported cases has doubled from the day before. And if we take a look at our graph, it is a jump from yesterday, but also when we compare the figure to last Wednesday, it's a jump by more than 920 cases, 929 to be exact. Let's also move over to the regional infections here. A record high number of cases were posted in all three places of the metropolitan region, including over 1,700 in the capital Seoul. And meanwhile, here, Chungcheongnam-do province posted close to 300 cases. We'll take a closer look at what happened there in a bit. Also a triple-digit figure here in the southern city of Busan. And with that, Korea has a total number of more than 425,000 COVID-19 infections. And there's also a record high of single-day deaths here with 35 additional fatalities. Also, what's a record high is the number of patients that are currently in severe or critical condition, which has risen again from the day before to 586. Let's move over to the vaccination figures here in the nation. We've got 42.3 million people who received at least one COVID-19 shot and 40.6 million that are fully vaccinated. And as you can see, the number of people who are getting their first dose is now declining compared to the number of people who are getting their second shot as well as booster shots. Moving abroad, the total number of infections around the world stands now at 259 million and the death toll at 5.18 million. And the World Health Organization is warning that in Europe, the death toll could exceed 2.2 million by March. So an additional 700,000 fatalities in Europe if the current waves continue. And speaking of the waves in Europe, we've got here countries that are still seeing 5-digit figures of daily increases, more than 40,000 in the UK, over 54,000 posted in Germany in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time, and also resurgences in the Netherlands as well as the Czech Republic. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, with over 4,000 infections reported on this Wednesday, Korea has indeed been pushed into uncharted territory. For more on this, I have Choi Min-jung here in the studio. Min-jung, welcome. I have to admit, though, I thought Yeon-sung would be here today, but I hear she's out in the field.
Yes, she is, but I'm happy to be here.
Right, all right. Min-jung, let's begin with the Prime Minister's words earlier on this Wednesday regarding the latest situation.
Right, so Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum on Wednesday said an emergency action plan could be adopted in the capital region if the situation doesn't improve. If the plan does come into effect, the country's phased return to normal could be put on hold, making way for the return of social distancing rules that have been previously lifted. Let's take a listen to what he said.
The virus situation is more serious than we had expected. According to risk levels announced on Monday, the nationwide threat level was at high, while the metropolitan area was at very high. If you just look at the capital region, we may have to urgently review the emergency plan at any time.
Kim also stressed that it is crucial to free up more hospital beds to meet the needs of critically ill patients in the capital region. He called for an expansion of at-home treatment for people with asymptomatic or mild infections to make more beds available for patients who need them.
Although at-home treatment is a major pillar of medical response, it has not yet been properly implemented. Last week, the proportion of home care patients was less than 20%, and it actually decreased compared to the previous week. If everyone who has mild or asymptomatic symptoms occupy a bed, the lives of patients who need intensive treatment will be threatened because they will not be able to get hospitalized.
More than 1,000 new patients in the capital region alone are now subject to home treatment. This accounts for nearly 1/3 of all infections in the community reported nationwide on Wednesday. With the growing number of people being treated outside the country's hospital networks, health authorities are looking for ways to better manage patients who are recovering at home.
Right, of course. Meanwhile, despite the grim situation, though, I understand we have some positive news for those seeking to travel to Saipan.
Right, so people traveling to Saipan will no longer have to quarantine upon arrival. Starting December 12th, Korean travelers on the island will be exempt from a 5-day quarantine in their accommodations. And of course, this only applies to those who have been fully vaccinated. Korea and Saipan signed a travel bubble agreement in June, but self-isolation rules had remained in place. The ease restrictions align with the latest U.S. travel guidelines, which provide quarantine exemptions for fully vaccinated international travelers.
Right. All right, Min-jung, thank you for now, but do stay with us for the extended talks.
Sure.
Right, back on the domestic front now, the latest surge in daily cases was largely forecast by authorities prior to the launch of Korea's exit strategy. But what are they saying now?
Well, Sunny, remember back at the beginning of November when we talked about the possible resurgences, and that was also after the Halloween weekend. And things could have been worse than we have expected, that some have expected. But now we are in the 4th week since we entered into this first phase, and many experts have been saying that numbers could rise starting around a month after transitioning into such a living with the COVID-19 scheme. So it was not an unforeseeable increase in terms of infection numbers, and that stance has been renewed by the government this Wednesday, but it's other factors that are leading to greater concerns. Let's take a listen.
A difficult situation is persisting with the continuous rise in patients in severe or critical condition. The rise is especially notable among those aged 60 and above. Cluster infections at nursing hospitals and nursing facilities, where vaccinations started in the first half of the year, are also increasing.
And that is exactly why Sun is stressing the importance of speeding up additional shots or booster shots for these seniors who were the first ones who got vaccinated earlier in the year. And in fact, he mentioned that the government is aiming to complete the current booster shot campaign at nursing facilities and nursing hospitals by November 26th. Currently, we've got 80.7% completed. Sun also noted cluster infections among unvaccinated people are on the rise too, due to a certain degree of complacency setting in.
Right, actually, a major cluster infection broke out among unvaccinated people outside the capital region. Since Sunday, over 230 people were caught the virus at a religious settlement in Chungcheongnam-do province, and it turned out that more than 91% of the people were not vaccinated.
Right, which will translate to, of course, greater burden in the medical arena to treat these people. And speaking of that, I understand additional measures have been shared to ease the medical burden in the capital region.
Right, Sunny. So right now we've got around 71% of ICU beds operating in the country, and in the capital region that percentage stands at 83.7%. 66.2% of hospitals designated for infectious diseases are operating nationwide, and for the capital region that percentage is of course higher again at 75.2%. So this situation has recently led to a new problem over patients who are waiting to be assigned to hospitals or treatment centers. And here's more on this latest situation.
As of this Wednesday, there are 778 patients who have been on the waiting list for more than 1 day to get their hospital beds. It's a slight drop from yesterday and the day before, but there are still a lot of people waiting. Most of them are asymptomatic patients who appear otherwise healthy, and we have ordered infectious disease hospitals and other medical centers to manage these patients, who are also monitored 3 times a day.
So health officials this Wednesday discussed ways to shorten the waiting time for newly confirmed patients. First of which is securing hundreds of more hospital beds separate from those that are being added through a recent administrative order in the capital region. From November 6th until this Wednesday, 62 beds for moderately ill patients and 730 beds for those in less serious condition have been added. Also in preemptive measures, an administrative order order of increasing hospital beds in the non-capital region has also been implemented starting this Wednesday. The government is also looking for ways to operate hospital beds more efficiently, meaning more flexible adjustments are to be made based on the assessment of medical facilities. And that includes an early discharge from hospitals if doctors believe a patient has recovered sufficiently.
Right, I see. Now, one more question, so before I turn to Min-jung. What can you tell us about the recent call for blood donations here in the country?
Right, Sunny. So the government has been asking for citizens' participation in blood donation throughout the pandemic on a number of occasions. Now, this time it is because of the winter season when blood donation tends to drop. As of Tuesday, the country has enough blood supplies to last 4.2 days, meaning the alert level for the blood reserves stands at caution, which applies when blood can be supplied between 3 and 5 days. Stressing that blood donation is affected by cold weather, the government asked citizens to go to their nearest blood bank and make reservations online or on mobile apps.
Right, I see. Now, with regard to government efforts, Min-jung, to better respond to surging infections, I understand vaccinations for teenagers are being strongly advised yet again.
Right, so vaccine reservations for teenagers aged 12 to 17 have reopened. The initial registration window had closed, but the government has decided to allow more bookings from Tuesday with the full resumption of in-person learning at schools. The decision also comes amid the growing number of infections that have afflicted young people, especially the unvaccinated. On the heels of an easing of restrictions, which started earlier this month, the number of daily infections among school students surpassed the 500 mark for the first time last week. The latest round of bookings will be open until the end of the year to allow unvaccinated school-aged children to get their shots.
Right. And Min-jung, I understand the rampant spread of the virus among children and teenagers is also a major concern over in the U.S. Tell us more.
Right. Over in the U.S., infections among those aged under 18 are on the rise. Last week, the number of patients in this age bracket rose by 32% compared to a week ago, with more than 140,000 cases. Children also accounted for over a quarter of all COVID-19 cases in the week ending November 18th. U.S. authorities have begun administering vaccines to children aged 5 to 11 starting this month, but vaccination rates are not speeding up as most parents still seem very hesitant about giving shots to their children.
And that actually also seems to be an issue in many other countries around the world. Also Israel, which recently has started to vaccinate its younger children as well. Experts there are also saying that there are struggles because parents are finding it hard to make that decision for their children. So that's something that Korea should also be monitoring at this point. And also, according to a vaccination management team official Hong Jung-ik at the KDCA, he also mentioned that because while Min-jung mentioned that the vaccination rate is still low, but that doesn't mean that this will stop at this point. But there are still many parents who are still hesitant in whether they should vaccinate their kids or not. Also, this Wednesday, one superintendent in the city of Gwangju, an education superintendent, mentioned that the government should make more recommendations regarding vaccinations for teenagers as well as children. And in fact, in Gwangju, there has been 13 infections among high school students in this month because there were 80% of them that are vaccinated, while the number of elementary kids was 79. So you can really see how much higher the number of infections recently were among younger children because they have not been vaccinated yet.
Right. Well, hopefully news about the efficacy of Pfizer's vaccine, which you shared with us yesterday among the youth, will boost the uptake among these teenagers and children.
Hope so.
Right, so thank you for that. And Min-jung, thank you. I'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Samsung Electronics has shared the site of its new U.S. chip plant. The city of Taylor in Texas will host Samsung's second chip factory in the Lone Star State. Our AMCHAM has the top story.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics is to build its new U.S.-based cutting-edge semiconductor plant in Texas. Samsung announced on Wednesday that it had chosen the city of Taylor as the location for its $17 billion facility. The company said in a regulatory filing that it has completed consultations regarding its new foundry line investment with the city. The decision was made 5 months after Samsung's initial announcement to establish a second next-generation semiconductor plant in the U.S. amid global chip shortages. The new chip factory will be Samsung's second in Texas, situated roughly 50 kilometers from its giant manufacturing hub in Austin. The Wall Street Journal reports that Taylor offered Samsung hefty tax incentives, including property tax breaks of up to 92.5% for the first 10 years. Construction on the new plant, which will span more than 5 million square meters, is to begin in the first half of next year, and operations are expected to start around the end of 2024. The company says they will create 2,000 high-tech jobs and produce advanced logic chips for application in areas such as mobile phones, 5G, and artificial intelligence. According to an expert, with its new plant, Samsung hopes to win more clients in the race against rivals TSMC and Intel to expand chip manufacturing in the U.S.
Until now, Samsung Electronics has been lagging behind TSMC in the US market. But with the new factory, it can be seen as an opportunity to reach an equivalent position.
However, he added that the success of the foundry business would very much depend on securing customers. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in line with efforts to cap escalating fuel prices worldwide, the US will tap into its oil reserves. Korea, for its part, is also poised to partake in this campaign, as are its neighbors, including Japan. Pyeonji reports.
With gas prices last month soaring to a 7-year high, the U.S. is rolling up its sleeves in an effort to bring the price down. The White House said Tuesday local time that it will release 50 million barrels of oil from its reserves as part of a global effort to bring down soaring energy prices.
So today I'm announcing that the largest ever release from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help provide the supply we need as we recover from this pandemic. The bottom line, today we're launching a major effort to moderate the price of oil.
The move is being taken in coordination with other major oil-consuming nations, including South Korea, China, Japan, India, and the UK. India said it would release 5 million barrels, while the UK said it would allow firms to voluntarily release 1.5 million barrels of oil from privately held reserves. Japan said it would release 4.2 million barrels of oil, which is the equivalent of about 1 or 2 days' demand in the country. As for South Korea, details regarding the amount and timing have not been decided yet. But the country's Ministry of Energy and Foreign Affairs said in a joint statement that the amount is likely to be similar to the level previously released at the request of the International Energy Agency in 2011, when Libya's oil production was disrupted by civil unrest. The ministry said it has decided to accept the U.S. request, considering the rapid rise in global oil prices, the importance of the U.S.-Korea alliance, and the participation of other major countries. The government said that in this case, under IEA standards, there are enough domestic oil reserves to last for over 100 days, so it will not affect the domestic oil supply, even in an emergency scenario. The global move comes after the OPEC group of oil-producing nations, including Saudi Arabia and Russia, repeatedly ignored calls from U.S. President Joe Biden, asking to rapidly boost production. OPEC struck to an agreement to only increase production gradually, saying it is concerned about a resurgence of COVID-19 cases driving down demand, as happened at the peak of the pandemic. Pyeonji, Arirang News.
In other news, the nominees for the 2022 Grammy Awards have been announced, and Korea's BTS has secured a nomination under the Best Group Performance category for the song Butter. Han Sung-woo tells us more.
For the second year in a row, the Recording Academy has officially named K-pop juggernaut BTS as a nominee for the Best Pop Duo or Group Performance at the Grammy Awards. The boy band's hit single Butter, which spent a total of 10 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, will be competing against the likes of Coldplay's Higher Power and Justin Bieber and Benny Blanco's Lonely for the honor, with the winner to be announced at the awards ceremony in Los Angeles on January 31st. If they win, the group will go down in history as the first Korean act in popular music to take home a golden gramophone. BTS's Grammy nomination this year comes just days after the boy band bagged 3 awards at the American Music Awards, including the top prize, Artist of the Year, catapulting themselves to the top of the U.S. music industry. So expectations were high, but the group was not nominated for the prestigious Record of the Year, nor any other of the Grammy's 4 general field categories, proving once again the award ceremony's traditional focus on artistry rather than commercial performance. Some critics say, however, that the snub has increased BTS's chances of securing the Grammy that they have been nominated for.
That they weren't nominated for an award in the general field, despite deserving it, shows the nomination process didn't reflect reality. Then again, this has set the tone for BTS winning the Best Pop Duo or Group Performance. If BTS isn't given the award in January, tremendous distrust of the Recording Academy will follow.
Grammy nominees are determined by eligible voting members of the Recording Academy, comprised of music industry experts and professionals, like artists, producers, sound engineers, and critics. Members finished their first round of votes early this month and await the final round, set to start December 6th and close a month later. 한성우, Arirang News.
On the local front, the latest findings continue to paint a rather bleak portrait of the country's demographic trends, with the number of deaths surpassing that of births, while the number of people choosing to start a family retreats further. Here's Min Soo-kyun.
The number of births in South Korea has yet again dropped, declining on year for 70 consecutive months. This means it's been falling for more than 5 years. Data on Wednesday shows that the number of newborns in September stood at 21,920, down almost 7% from a year ago. It's the lowest reading for any September on record, and this was largely due to last year's low base effect.
The number of births in September dropped 6.7% on year. It's quite a big fall. This is due to the base effect from last year, when the number fell just 2.5%.
The country also reported its highest number of deaths for the month of September. More than 25,500 deaths were recorded, up 5% on year. The number of deaths has continued to exceed births for almost 2 years. The number of marriages also dipped further, hitting a record low of around 13,700. This figure is down by 10.4% from a year before. The fall was attributed to a population decline in people in their 30s, as well as to the ongoing pandemic. Strict social distancing measures and a surge in COVID-19 cases led many couples to push back their wedding dates. The long Chuseok holiday in September was also a reason behind the drop. Statistics Korea added that the number of marriages has been declining since 2012. Meanwhile, the number of divorces plunged 12.3% on year to over 8,300 cases, almost the same as the previous 2 months. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Gonde, that's a relatively modern colloquial Korean noun, quite common within the corporate arena, to refer to a person who is most likely to fuel tension between older and younger workers. Our Kim Sung-min explains.
Do you know someone who is older than you, who is condescending and believes he or she is always right and that you're always wrong? In Korea, there's a word to describe exactly that type of person. 꼰대.
While 꼰대 was first student slang to label stubborn and strict teachers, it's now widely used outside the classroom, especially within offices full of workers from different generations. In fact, in a survey, 9 in 10 employees said 꼰대 behavior happens at their workplaces. From ignoring others' opinions and always talking about back in my day, to being forceful and asking younger workers to endure hardships, 꼰대 behavior often creates generational tension. To address this, a panel of 4 leaders from different companies sat together on Tuesday for a table discussion hosted by American Chamber of Commerce in Korea. There, the panel said that 꼰대 is not just about age.
It isn't necessarily to do with age. It's more of a mindset. If somebody is very rigid in their views, unwilling to listen to other people's opinions, unwilling to try new things.
So how should potential 건대s out there change? The president of Qualcomm Korea says self-recognition is key.
I'm 건대, and that's the beginning of good relationship with employees. The worst 건대 is self-denying 건대. So you have to admit it, and once you admit you are 건대, then the MZ generation, they listen to.
Also highlighted in the discussion was the need to not simply write off older workers, as they also bring value to the company.
They have experience with the same company. They know the customers. They know the suppliers. And when you have the right teamwork, I think that is what makes it a very optimum type of an organization.
He added that with the younger generations coming into the workforce, educating both generations to create harmony is important for the company to succeed. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
College campuses are also working to transition into a new normal as we take steps out of tough pandemic restrictions. Do take a look.
On November 2nd, Seoul National University held its Fall Festival, which was the first face-to-face event held in 2 years since COVID-19. Attendance was limited to 70 people, but it was meaningful, and that this was the first offline festival to be held after the gradual return to normal life scheme has been implemented.
Sitting on the lawn, chit-chatting with your friends, and studying in the library, those were some of the things that you could expect on campus. However, as the pandemic broke out, now we haven't really been able to see those. But thanks to the Living with COVID-19 scheme, now university campuses are gradually getting back to normality.
In fact, many universities have switched small classes and lab classes from online to offline in nearly 2 years. Sungsil University has also joined the trend. The school converted some online classes to offline from this fall, and currently about 40% of all lectures are conducted face-to-face.
화상으로만 만났던 학우들을 이제 현장에서 만나고 교수님도 만나고 함으로써 더 좋은 질의 수업을 들을 수 있는 것 같아서 좋습니다.
강의를 영상으로만 보면서 되게 집중이 안 되고 또 모르는 거에 대해 이제 메일로 따로 질문하기에 약간 어려움이 있었는데 실제로 대면 수업을 하면서 교수님과 실시간으로 질문이랑 대답을 주고받을 수 있어서 정말 만족스럽게 다니고 있어요.
Those dubbed Corona class students, they refer to freshmen who entered school in 2020 and 2021, felt new and different as this marks their first time on campus.
대학생이 돼가지고 대학교 오질 않으니까 약간 대학생이 되었다는 실감 같은 게 부족할 때도 있는데 확실히 대학교를 오고 나서 보니까 약간 진짜 대학생 같은 느낌이 들기도 하고
확실히 대면 수업을 하다 보니까 친구들도 많이 만나게 되고 원래 원했던 대학 생활을 조금 더 하고 있지 않나 이런 생각이 듭니다.
To take offline classes or to use school facilities, you need to verify your full vaccination or a negative PCR test result taken within 48 hours.
Despite the quarantine pass system, more students are using school facilities such as libraries, gyms, and cafeterias.
아무래도 학교 나와서 학교 시설도 이용하다 보면 이제 약간 좀 더 많이 움직이게 되고 이제 부지런하게 움직이는 게 좋았다고 생각해요, 저는.
또 학교 학내 시설을 이제 조금씩 다시 사용할 수 있게 되니까 학교 와서 공부를 할 수 있어서 능률도 조금 좋아지는 것 같고 공부도 조금은 더 열심히 하는 것 같아요.
While students are enjoying campus life for the first time in a long time, some have also voiced concern.
바이러스 감염이 이제
그 교내에서 일어날 것도 좀 걱정이 되고 사실 가장 좋은 거는 이제 비대면을 했을 때는 이제 감염 확률이 가장 낮기 때문에 사실 그런 건 무시할 수 없다. 대면으로 하면 무조건 리스크는 생기는 거죠.
근데 그래도 수업에서는 다 마스크 쓰고 있고 그래서 그거는 괜찮은 것 같고 다만 밖에서 밥을 먹을 때라던가 이제 대면에서 사람이 많아지다 보니까 그럴 땐 좀 걱정이 되는 것 같아요.
With the increasing number of students on campus, the school has strengthened its quarantine measures. The school is planning to thoroughly implement quarantine measures by installing partitions and keeping a certain distance between seats in the classroom.
위드코로나라는 어떤 메시지가 나올 때쯤부터 해서 학교에서는 대면 수업을 더 이상 미룰 수는 없다 이런 판단을 좀 했습니다. 한 달 정도가 지금 지났는데 잘 유지가 되고 또 안전이 확보되고 있는 것으로 그렇게 보고 있습니다.
Many colleges aim to expand face-to-face classes from this upcoming winter semester and return to full-fledged offline classes starting next spring.
친구들이랑 더 자주 만나서 더 재밌게 수업을 하고 좀 더 동아리 활동 같은 것도 더 자유롭게 할 수 있었으면 좋겠어요.
코로나 인원 제한 이런 거 걱정 없이 과 동기들이랑 MT도 가보고 싶고 수업 끝나고 술자리도 다 같이 가져보고 싶고 그런 사소한 일상을 누려보고 싶은 마음입니다.
It's been already 4 weeks since schools returned to partial face-to-face classes. However, we do need to remind ourselves that we shouldn't keep our guards down just yet. This has been 신세계.
Two antiviral drugs look to be among the first set of effective oral treatments for COVID-19, essentially to keep people away from hospitals. For more, I have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur Korea. Welcome back, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
I also have Professor Howard Lee from Seoul National University. Pleasure to have you back, Professor Lee.
Thank you.
Dr. Kim, we'll start with you. Let's begin with a look at the reported efficacy of the two antiviral pills against COVID-19 by Merck and Pfizer.
Well, first of all, I have to talk about the some drugs that are actually being developed or being used right now. The COVID-19 actually two different phases, or sometimes we call the periods. So the first phase is virus replication phase. So in this case, the antiviral drugs, which actually block the virus replication, could be very useful. But in the second phase, this is inflammatory phase. So in this case, the very excessive immune response actually damages our body, not the virus replication. So the represented drug in this phase is the dexamethasone, some steroid drug. So the drugs that we are actually talking about right now is the Merck drug and the Pfizer drugs actually belong to the some antiviral drugs, which actually act against the virus replication. So these drugs, although these two drugs actually are acting on the viral replication, the mechanism of these drugs are very different. So basically, the Merck drug actually this is actually mimicking the some building block of some viral the RNA. This is the genetic material. So when they incorporate into the some viral RNA, then actually mess up all the genetic information of the viruses. That's how these antiviral drugs work. But in the case of the Pfizer drug, when the virus enters the cell, the virus actually produces a viral protein to play any viral function. But this protein is actually produced by not in the individual protein, but as a big chunk. So this big chunk of protein has to somehow be processed by some special enzyme called the proteases. This protease is very effectively blocked by this Pfizer drug. So mechanism makes it very different. But anyway, according to some very recent phase 3 clinical trials, these two drugs are very effective against the blocking the transition to the some severe COVID-19 by the 50% for the Merck drug and the 89% of the Pfizer drugs. And then these are drugs actually eligible for the obviously it's mild and moderate COVID-19 patients with the at this point is with some high risk factors. And then since I just told you this is antiviral drugs, so this has to be used very early phase of the COVID-19 disease. So based on this clinical trial, these drugs has to be used at least within the 5 days of the symptom onset. So that's the sort of just a summary for the drugs so far.
Right. And Professor Lee, both Merck and Pfizer have reportedly shared clinical trial results that Dr. Kim just mentioned in press releases and not scientific articles. So accordingly, some critics are saying there is insufficient data. What are your thoughts?
Those concerns arose primarily because only interim results have been available up to this point. But that's not without a reason. In the clinical trials sponsored by both Merck and Pfizer, their oral pills showed overwhelmingly super efficacy profile against placebo. So with those results, the Independent Data Monitoring Safety Committee, in collaboration with the FDA, the U.S. regulatory agency, asked the companies to stop further enrollment of patients into those clinical trials because with those overwhelmingly superior efficacy of those pills, it's not ethical to enroll additional patients into those trials. When it comes to short-term safety profile, also there was no difference between the pills and placebo, which is a good sign. But when it comes to long-term safety, there is still a concern, particularly for molnupiravir by Merck, because as Dr. Kim summarized, it can be mutagenic. In other words, it can it can increase the risk of mutagenesis, in other words, mutational risk. But nobody knows whether that turns out to be true or not. Still, to me, the benefit clearly outweighs the risk, and the risk-benefit ratio will be meticulously scrutinized by the U.S. regulatory agency, FDA. So that's where we stand.
Right. Keeping in mind what Professor Lee has just said, Dr. Kim, what are your thoughts on these two antiviral pills serving to perhaps change the course of our fight against COVID-19?
I think just based on the efficacy and the safety, the data that we have right now, it could just substantially just affect the some course of the pandemic right now. Well, in just under the condition that we have a very just enough supply of these the drugs, and then if we can somehow just solve the some cost issues. So so that's the main issues. And then sometimes we actually just compare these two drugs to the Tamiflu. This is actually used for the influenza infection, and then Tamiflu is also antiviral drugs, which means it's actually inhibited virus replication. But the mechanism is actually a little bit different for Tamiflu. The Tamiflu actually inhibits the secretion of the virus from the infected cells. So those three drugs actually just inhibit the very different steps of the virus life cycle. But in terms of antiviral drugs, they are very same, and then those have to be used within certain just time after the symptom onset. So currently the issue is that some access issue, which is actually involves in the mass production and also cost issues. In the case of Tamiflu, when some people just experience some symptoms, well, people kind of just easily just access this Tamiflu. We actually got the prescription, then get some drug from the pharmacy, then we can actually take it very just easily. But for these two drugs, I think in addition to the cost issues, mass production is also an issue. So currently, the target of these antiviral drugs for a while, it would be the patient with the mild and moderate COVID-19 with high risk factors.
Right. And keeping in mind the issue that Dr. Kim has just mentioned with regard to supply, Professor Lee, both Merck and Pfizer therefore have licensed their drug to generic drug makers and for supply to low and middle income countries.
Right.
What do you believe are the implications of this latest move?
It's huge. While patents are still in effect, no company is allowed to make generics. That's a current legal system. So the agreement agreed upon between Pfizer and the MPP or medicinal patent pool signifies that Pfizer has decided to forego any royalties on sales that will occur in all of those countries covered by the agreement. That means more than 50% of people in the world can get the drug at a much cheaper price.
Right. And stay with Pfizer, Professor Lee. Pfizer, however, has refrained from granting a similar license for its COVID-19 vaccine. How do you explain its shift in stance with regard to its antiviral pill?
That's a very interesting question. I think that's both a humanitarian and scientific decision. The vaccine is a biologic, so not every company can manufacture it with a sufficient level of quality, even though Pfizer allows them, the company, to do so. This can lead to a significant drawback in the efficacy, safety, and performance of any vaccine. Logistics, such as cold chain, is another issue. In contrast, however, oral drugs are relatively easy to manufacture with a sufficient level of quality at many places in the world. Additionally, logistics is not a big hurdle for oral drugs as long as the stability is ensured.
Right, and staying with the manufacture of these generic versions, Dr. Kim, could you walk us through the process?
Well, the process is generally the technology transfers just can be made between the, for example, like Merck or just Pfizer to other just pharmaceutical companies just making some genetic medicines, and then generally this is all just a chemical synthesis. Some organic chemists do this kind of job. So this is some large scale, not laboratory scale. So since it is a large scale, some factory scale, there might be some specific some instruction from the Merck or Pfizer to the some genetic producing pharmaceutical companies.
Right. And how do you respond to calls, Dr. Kim, for a further expansion of this license deal to more countries, to include others like Brazil and Mexico?
Well, I think ideally it would be much better to just expand the scope of just a license to probably more and more countries. But in the end, the companies they are actually considering their just a profit because they invested a lot of money for this development. So we have to actually just consider. But for those countries with the just hard hit by the COVID-19 right now, I think those countries, first of all, they have to just consider seriously more just the vaccination first, because the vaccine is much cheaper and much more affordable than the oral drugs right now. And then they have to just think about just oral drug options.
Right, I see. Professor Lee, under the royalty-free license, as you mentioned, that has been granted by both Merck and Pfizer, some 100 low and middle-income nations that, like you mentioned, account for over half of the world's population will have access to affordable COVID-19 medication. Having said that, what now are the tasks that need to be tackled to allow for an effective treatment campaign in these countries?
Those oral pills should be taken within 3 to 5 days after a COVID-19 case has been confirmed. That means the availability of accurate and reliable diagnostic measures, such as PCR, is indispensable. Well, in that sense, Korea is lucky and far advanced in this arena. However, dispensing is another issue, since the beauty of those oral drugs is the capability that they can be taken orally at home. But under the current dispensing system in South Korea, patients should go to a local drugstore to get the drug, which is not possible in case of COVID-19 patients. So, hospital dispensing should be allowed, or some sort of telepharmacy has to be made possible.
I see. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim, you've kept us quite updated on efforts by local companies to develop their own COVID-19 antiviral pill. What are the latest on such efforts?
Well, some companies actually just trying their antiviral drug candidates on the phase 3 clinical trials, and the others actually just drop the drug candidates after finishing the phase 2 clinical trials. And one of the reasons is that, just recently, one of the global big pharmaceutical company, the Roche, also they just failed to just achieve their primary goal of the antiviral drugs, which is called 8527. The mechanism of action is very similar to molnupiravir, but they failed. And then when I actually reviewed the results of those phase 2 clinical trials, well, number one is actually just the number of just participants. I mean, just for enrollments for these clinical trials is pretty small. This is phase 2, just 100 or 200 people. And then in this all those drugs, actually, in order to just maximize the drug efficacy, they have to very carefully design their clinical trials, because most like some young people with the some mild COVID-19, well, they would just spontaneously recover. But most of the some very successful the clinical trials that also achieved by the Merck and Pfizer, they actually just targeted only just the mild and moderate COVID-19 patient with the high risk factors. So in this case, there are just groups of people who received the drugs, and the other groups of people who received the placebo. In the end, there's some they could obtain some very significant statistical power to demonstrate the antiviral efficacy of such drugs. So considering those kind of things, I think some companies are still just submitted their some modified phase 3 clinical trials, and then they got approved for such a trial from the Korean FDA, and then they are still now on the some phase 3 clinical trials. Those trials are ongoing right now.
Right, so advances are being made.
Sure.
And Professor Lee, what can you tell us about the importance of having a homegrown drug and perhaps the hurdles that need to be overcome in this development process?
The current pharmaceutical industry has not played a leading role on a global scale before. So it's not unusual or unexpected to see them lag quite behind global pharmaceutical companies in developing oral treatments against COVID-19. But don't get me wrong, I'm not underestimating the potential and capability of the current pharmaceutical industry. Still, there is a silver lining and competitive edge for a follower. For example, the compound by Iltong, a South Korean company, can be taken once a day orally, whereas the pills by Merck and Pfizer should be taken 3 to 4 times a day. So that is a lot of convenience in terms of patients' compliance. And it is my understanding that performing clinical trials in patients with COVID-19 in South Korea is cumbersome and difficult, if not impossible, particularly for those with early disease. And this is the target population of oral drugs. It is because any newly diagnosed COVID-19 patients will be directly sent to a regional treatment center where physicians and clinical people with the expertise and experience in clinical trials are very scarce.
I see. And Dr. Kim, Celltrion's Recorona was recently approved by the European Union. How does this monoclonal antibody treatment compare to the antiviral pills that we have?
Well, first of all, as I just said earlier in this the discussion, the monoclonal antibody is also sort of just antiviral drug, because this inhibits the virus replication cycle. But the steps of the virus life cycle is completely different. In this case, the key element, whether it is a monoclonal antibody or sometimes we talked about some convalescent plasma, the key element is the neutralizing antibody. The main the function of the neutralizing antibody is actually block the virus entry to the cells, which actually just inhibiting 2 different proteins from the virus and also the protein from the cell. So this monoclonal antibody is basically just inhibits the some early phase. It would just play a role in the early phase of the COVID-19. And then actually one of the so kind of just advantage of these monoclonal antibodies against the some oral drugs is as of now for this Recorona, the cost is much more affordable than oral drugs. Well, usually just monoclonal antibody is very expensive. But in this COVID-19 pandemic, I'm not quite sure about the cost of the some other monoclonal antibodies produced by produced in the companies in the U.S. right now. But at least in Korea, it's much more affordable than the oral drugs right now. And also, I want to just mention the safety issues. The monoclonal antibody, this is antibody, this is a protein. So compared to some chemical drugs, the safety is much better, much more tolerable than any chemical drugs. And then one about the some disadvantage of this monoclonal antibody is, well, this is an antibody, and this has to be administered by the IV injection, This is not in the outpatient setting. This is a hospital setting. But the good thing is this can be only just one IV injection is enough. But compared to the oral drugs has to be taken now. Just the Merck drugs and the Pfizer drugs have to be administered 5 days consecutively. Although it is much convenient, I mean, it can be taken by orally. So one of the advantages of this the cell-treated monoclonal antibodies we already have in our hands. So now just the number of severe COVID-19 patients is increasing in Korea right now, and with these monoclonal antibodies, we can actually effectively control the number of severe COVID-19 patients because according to many clinical trials on the monoclonal antibody, including just a cell-treated monoclonal antibody, this is quite effective just preventing the progression to severe COVID-19 by 70 or the 80% of drug efficacy.
Which currently would be higher than molnupiravir, which is 50.
Compared to molnupiravir, yeah, it's higher, but a little less was comparable to the Pfizer drug. So since we have already these monoclonal antibodies in our hands, maybe some experts, and including me, we actually suggest that maybe expanding the use of monoclonal antibodies to make just more people with some potential high-risk factors.
Right, I see. And Professor Lee, Korea has reportedly secured 400,000 courses of the antiviral oral treatment, which will be available hopefully early next year. In the meantime, what do you propose to ensure a safe and sustainable transition into a new normal?
That's simple. Two things. Number one, vaccine is still the main weaponry against COVID-19. So don't delay getting your jabs and booster shots behind the schedule. Number two, social distancing and wearing a facial mask are something that we still need to stick to. The pandemic is not gone yet.
Right, that is true. So vaccinations and face masks.
Yep.
All right, Professor Lee, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
And Dr. Kim, thank you very much for your thoughts and your time. Right, the presence of effective oral treatments may indeed change the course of COVID-19. But until then, prevention, health experts say, like our Professor Lee here in the studio, remains the best option. Thank you for watching.
지겨운가요? 힘든가요? 숨이 끝까지 찼나요? 모두가 최선을 다하고 있는 이 힘든 시기에도 분명 끝은 있을 테니까. 대한민국 모두가 다시 힘낼 수 있도록 한수원의 에너지